Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. Couple bits of housekeeping. Restrooms are out the door that you came in and to the right at the end of the hall. And if you would please quiet your cell phones. I'm glad you are all able to make it today. We have the Michigan Fibershed here, Melissa Duhame and Mitch Fairley on stage, and Angie will be making an appearance here in a little bit. Melissa's going to be speaking. Melissa Duhame is a team member of Michigan Fibershed and an ecology professor at the University of Michigan, where with a team of amazing scientists, her lab researches microplastics pollution, among other aspects of water sustainability and Great Lakes health. She has testified before the US Senate on microplastics pollution in the Great Lakes, trained as a science communication fellow, and has hosted and participated in numerous community science events in Detroit and Ann Arbor. Currently, Melissa is supporting the Michigan Fibershed through research, advocacy, and curriculum development to promote regional regenerative alternatives to fossil carbon-derived plastics. Today, she'll talk about the activities of the Michigan Fibershed and specifically their Flax-to-Linen community grow project. Thank you.
I was going to say, you conveniently gave me this clicker that I lost, because I do move around a bit. So thank you for the introduction, and thanks for joining us here. This is going to be hopefully a very interactive presentation. But first, I'll walk you through some of the things we'll talk about. So what is a fiber shed? If some of you have walked through, meandered around the tables on the first floor, you might have bumped into our table and presentation. If you haven't, then check it out after the talk. There's more to learn about the Michigan Fibershed. But we'll talk about it today here. And then why flax? Why are we on stage with a bundle of dried flax and spinning flax? And then I'll walk you through how flax is processed. And the, I guess, surprise takeaway that not everyone realizes is flax is the plant and fiber that gives rise to linen. So when we're talking about linen, we're talking about natural fiber that came from the flax plant. So first, what is a fiber shed? So I think folks tend to be more familiar with the idea of a watershed, or sometimes now with the local food movement, we've been talking about food sheds. And essentially, you can think of fiber shed in a very similar way in that there's a geographical boundary that is, in terms of watershed, it's like the drainage basin of water as it falls onto a landscape. And so it's a geographic boundaries and where a resource, a natural resource, is contained. And a fiber shed can be thought of in a very similar way. So it's where the focus is on the source of the raw material, so the fibers that maybe make up textiles, and then the transparency with which it's converted into clothing and the connectivity among all parts from soil to skin and back to soil. And so this quote comes from a woman by the name of Rebecca Burgess, and she published a book a few years ago that I highly recommend if you're interested in learning more about the idea of fiber sheds and how this idea manifested in Northern California over 10 years ago now. And the whole idea of it is thinking of a strategy to produce textiles, natural fiber textiles, that is counter to how most textiles, and when you think of fast fashion, for instance, come into being, where we have long global supply chains that often traverse multiple continents, often leaving a continent, going to another, and coming back again to be worn, and then another to be disposed of and landfilled. And it's pretty wild, the carbon footprint that just comes from clothing and textiles moving around the whole globe. And so the idea of a fiber shed is another vision to imagine that all of those steps could happen within a geographical boundary that you can see and you can touch and you can visit and you can see the land where your fiber grew. You could meet the miller, meet the farmer, touch the raw material, wear it, and then send it back to the soil and regenerate some of the nutrients that were lost in its production. So that is the vision that inspires the idea of a fiber shed. And since Rebecca Burgess has been supporting this vision, more than 79 global Fibershed affiliates have popped up around the world. And the idea is, obviously, a group in Northern California is not going to know the best design for a Fibershed in Michigan. And so a few years ago, I reached out interested in actually learning more about how could we map like what's going on in Michigan? Who is growing the fiber? What is happening to it next? How much of it? Where? And they said, oh, it sounds like you want to start a Fibershed. Like, okay, let's give it a go. So we've been thinking about how to support such a network here in Michigan. And we're one of a few regional affiliates. And by regional, I tend to think of the Great Lakes. But there are a number popping up around the country. And being part of this group has been really neat. The group of Fibershed affiliates. We meet every month. We talk about issues that the producers are facing, how to build culture around the idea of why locally, regionally produced fiber and textiles is important. We have a really big industry to fight against in terms of the fast fashion and all the both labor and environmental kind of destruction and practices that are off-sourced, but for really good profit. So there are I can go down a lot of realms talking about these things, which we can do more in the Q&A. But nonetheless, we're part of this now regional Fibershed affiliate program, and we have teamed up with, in particular, the Rust Belt Fibershed to begin to carry out and develop programming here in Michigan. And so this is kind of what the Fibershed quote that I shared from Rebecca Burgess references. So sometimes you'll also see this referred to as the soil-to-soil cycle. And I can walk you through it in that you can imagine fiber being produced. All natural fiber will inherently be produced, at least in Michigan, from the land. Sometimes that could also mean ocean. So growing from the land, either through animals or plants. This is then harvested. And not only the raw material, but also natural dyes can be grown and harvested. They're considered part of a functional Fibershed also. Moving on to some form of fiber or dye processing. So that would be, for instance, the mills. Moving on to designing and making, so cleaning, carding, spinning, dyeing fibers, and then weaving and knitting it into fabrics. Design, make, eventually the products are worn. And we also have a big interface here, which is retail. So where are folks finding and accessing the natural fiber garments that they want to be wearing? Sometimes that's actually one of the biggest burdens. It's like, how do you find this stuff? And is it affordable? And then another offshoot that we've kind of built in our Michigan Fibershed incarnation of this cycle is the reuse, repurpose, and repair cycle. And then ideally, this material, because it is all derived from carbon that came from the land, has not been exposed to toxic additives, which is a big assumption, and also sometimes practically very hard to do when you're developing textiles at a scale to clothe people, even within a Fibershed. But if you've dropped those toxins out of the fibers, then you can send it back into composting and then back to the land. So ideally, this is like a closed loop Fibershed soil-to-soil vision. This is the ideal that kind of seeds our dreams and what we're working towards. And that's what inspires what we do. And so some of what we've been doing in the last months and year has been reaching out to folks. And if you identify as doing any of these activities and want to be part of this network that we're building, please just reach out, drop us your name. We'll add you to our Fibershed list. This is just an example of how we've been able to map on different fiber farmers, the mills in the state of Michigan, also fiber arts guilds, and designers and makers across the state. And this is just a very short list of 2 retailers. There are, of course, many more. And Nextiles, a really neat business based in Detroit that is reusing, repurposing textile waste scraps. So this is an example of how we're hoping to map these activities around the state of Michigan and create a resource where hopefully more of these connections can be built for folks that are trying to interact with and be part of Michigan Fibershed activities. So mapping and supporting that Michigan Fibershed network is something that we're really interested in. We also do support natural fiber arts education. We spent some time in middle schools in Ann Arbor doing natural dyeing classes, which is fun. And then the big project that I think we've invested most of our time in so far has been the Flax-to-Linen Community Grow Project, and that's what I'm here to talk more about. So why flax? What's so great about flax? There's lots of cool things. One of my favorite is that you can just take a handful of seeds, throw it in the ground, and grow a plant that you could make a shirt out of. Like, this is linen. You don't have to be a sheep farmer. You don't have to be an alpaca farmer. Figure out how to like raise sheep and shear them and do all the, well, you'd still have to process the plant, and we'll talk through that today. But it is more accessible in some ways to grow a plant like flax than to raise animals. So that's one of my favorite things. We've also learned through our feasibility studies or trials throughout Michigan that it's actually suited to our regional climate. It doesn't need a lot of water. Low weed pressure, I might argue with that at some level. Some weeds pop up. And it will definitely affect the fiber, but not necessarily in a bad way, and I can show you what I mean by that. You can process the whole crop without chemicals. It just takes mechanical force, takes some water, but it's nothing like some of the other industrial scale processing that we have to do to get our textiles. Wide variety of applications. We know about linen as fabric, but the carbon, so I visited the National Flax Museum in Belgium, and there was a flax carbon fiber cello, bicycle parts, car seat for children, and I know even some of the kind of companies that make model cars in Detroit have been sourcing flax for carbon fiber innovation from other parts of the country and state. And so I know that there is interest in broader applications than textile, which is pretty cool. And I can show you when we process that bundle of flax on the table, a lot of materials left over. And that's the material you would use for these other applications, which is pretty cool. And since the flax industry in the US is really non-existent, we have the opportunity for reimagining a just and equitable economic development for this new product, which is pretty cool. We can kind of restart with a new vision. And we're not the only ones that are thinking about this and wanting to do it. So I'm going to show this video. I mentioned when I was introducing the Fibershed, the Rust Belt Fibershed. And so they're a group based in Cleveland, and a few years ago they had a video production team working with their Flax Community Grow Project, and this was what they put together. And I think it summarizes pretty well why flax, why regional fiber, as well as you'll start to see some of these tools in action.
Generative culture. Our global supply chain is completely limiting our autonomy. When we look at our local economy and we look at our bioregion and what we can do with our environment and with all the skills and trades that we have in this area, when we realize that, we can actually take control back and create something within our bioregion that, we would be importing from other places in this world, and we can actually take that back and make it a part of our local economy. We can empower people, and the climate emergency is showing us that we need to change our ways. The way that we create our garments, what we're doing right now is not sustainable. And what we're doing here in this flax project and with Frayed Knot Farms is we are really creating a product that is sustainable and that will carry us through for generations in a way that is ecologically mindful and regenerative.
That's part of a regenerative system, is closing that loop, repairing what we're doing and also creating at the same time. So we solarize the soil instead of tilled it, and that allows the carbon to stay in the soil. We added compost, adding organic matter from local food scraps that would have gone to the landfills that we were able to mitigate in order to add fertility to our soils. We broadcast seeded, and we didn't have to use heavy machinery. It was all hand done and hand based, and then harvesting it and leaving the soil there and then retting it and using that microbiology in the soil, creating a product without synthetic fertilizers or pesticides so that it's safe to wear.
Fiber is just one entry point into that regenerative culture. There's food, there's other things, but when we can focus on place-based anything, when we can focus on co-creation, when we can focus on trying to create a system where everything is thriving and it's not extractive, where we take from one thing and don't have something for the other part of it, when we can focus on that, we can build a culture in the Rust Belt Fibershed where everything will thrive. It's been 2 years now that we've been growing and harvesting this flax and working with it and working with the community on it. And the really exciting thing for the future of this is that I think it's been evolving as we've been going through this process. And we've been talking about so many different pathways for this, but really the one thing that's settling in for us with this flax project is the connection to other regions that are also growing flax and the excitement that's bubbling up about this new way of looking at our clothes and this new material that has, for decades now, been outsourced. And when we can bring that back and look at all of these people who are now excited, we're talking to people in Oregon and Washington and California, but also people out in Philadelphia, have been super interested in this, growing plots of flax. And we're so excited to be able to combine our energies with all those other people and really look into the industry of flax and making it something that is sustainable, getting investors involved, getting other people involved to see that this is a real product and how this can all be a real possibility.
Okay, cool. I don't take any credit for that, except knowing Jess and Sarah. They host really a wonderful symposium every year. It's just down in Cleveland, so if you're interested in this type of work, check that out. They just did it. And I gave a talk at the symposium this year on microplastics pollution, and it was it's a really great community to be involved in and with, and we're always talking about how to build out our kind of regional hub of fiber sheds and keep working together. So now we'll talk about flax, just offering more of an idea of what it looks like to grow. So we have some images from growing around mostly Washtenaw County. This was our first year. Last year we spread even more broadly across the state. So prepping a bed looks very similar to how you might prep a bed for other crops. Many options. There we go. Planting seeds, we broadcast seed them. We mostly have done it by hand, but I've also used a broadcaster for the bigger plots. And this is what it looks like. We don't grow like this much. In fact, for fiber, I'm not sure anywhere in the US is growing this much until maybe this summer, and I can talk more about that project. not in Michigan. But it's beautiful. And you have about a day or two of these really beautiful, delicate, soft, bluish flowers. And so as we're growing as a group, we're also collecting data. And this is a data collection template that we also share with the Rust Belt folks. And I think a very similar one is used in Pennsylvania Community Grow Project, so that we can kind of harmonize the data collection and then also see how some of the properties shift in different regions as we kind of start to regrow flax in the US. So we collect information like the date of the first flowering, the stem count at that flowering date. And this is again what it looks like when it pops up. You do have a few weeds in there. Date of the first seed bowl, so this is like a marker of the maturation of the plant. And then we go through the harvesting, drying of the plants. And then there's this process called retting. Retting is like an Old English word for rotting, and that's literally what's happening. You can either ret it on the field itself, and this is what will be done, for instance, in the fields in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and northern France, where most of the production of flax and growing of flax happens. And they just harvest the crop and lay it out in rows, all mechanized. And for about 2 weeks, it lays on the field and rots. And then they come by with a turner, specially designed equipment, and it all flips over the other way, and then it rets on the other side. And I've been learning this by talking to people that do this work in Europe, that there's unfortunately it is the flax guy. Maybe we can be more gender expansive when we're redesigning our flax industry here in the US. But so the flax guy walks around, drives around in his probably electric car or takes a train, and tests the fibers out on the field to determine the precise moment that the flax is ready. So it's really an important skill and craft to acquire, because the retting is the most critical part for the flax quality. So they're able to determine when it's ready. And what's happening, no, I don't have the image yet, but we'll come back to it. Essentially, it's breaking down some parts of the flax fiber to break the fiber bundles away from the rougher parts of the stem. And you can either do it out on the field, which is easier at that large scale, or in a tank, which goes a lot faster, and you have to be careful not to over-ret it. And then the flax gets bundled up and either hand processed or sent to industrial processing mills. And in the cases of most of those big fields and growers in Europe, they're sending it usually to India and China. So they're also not processing most, though there are some smaller scale processors in Europe also. So this is kind of talks you through that process, or walks you through. We have the seeds to the green flax straw that's picked from the field, to broken flax, scutched flax, combed flax, and then finally the woven linen fabric. And we have the tools for each of those steps here on the stage, and I'll demo those as well as let anyone interested come up and give it a go themselves. So here's the map of last year's Flax-to-Linen Grow project. And here are some images of the community-grown flax. We really have a diversity of morphology. And now I'll walk you through. So the plowing and the sowing, the pulling of the flax, the stooking into these kind of pyramid-shaped piles to let them dry. Rippling helps to take off the seed heads. Retting, which we talked about. Breaking, which is this device here behind Mitch on the stage. Hackling and scutching. So scutching is literally whacking the bundle with a blade to try to get off the chunks of leftover plant matter. And then the hackling is dragging them through the other torture device on the table, which are these nails. They're actually horseshoe nails. and they comb out more of the plant debris, and then step 10, spinning. And Mitch is spinning flax, flax tow. And so we'll be able to walk through these steps at the end here. So that breaking, with this breaking device, it's very technical. You take your bundle of flax. I wasn't going to demo yet, but might as well. And so this is what I was talking about earlier. Here's a cross-section of the plant, a single fiber. And what you're doing is you're breaking down mostly this part and this part. And here are the bundles of fibers. And so the whole point of the retting is to break down the cells that are kind of holding this all intact through rotting. It's like fungal and bacterial action that's eating away at these sugars, plant sugars, and then releasing these fibers if you've done it correctly. So now everything that's left is physically manipulating this to get rid of this other matter. And that hopefully is what falls to the floor. I know some of this is a little bit better retted than others, so I'll try. So you take a bundle and literally just break it. So a lot of that falls off. That tells me that was probably too dry and over-retted. And do the other side. Sorry, library. No mess. Thought the drop cloth would help. Okay, so you kind of get the idea, and you can start to see there's some fibers sticking out there and hinting to you that they're in there. And then, let's see if we can go on to the sketching. Is this beautiful? So we were super fortunate. Someone in our Fibershed offered to build us this equipment this year, which was really fun. And it's the most beautiful sketching blade I've ever seen. I've used a few. So this just kind of whacking and trying to get some of that rough stuff off. And then there's to get you something good to look at, do a little bit more hand work. So you can imagine this is not, very quickly going to get me enough material to make myself the shirt that I'm wearing, which is made out of linen. I'll talk more about that at the end. How to imagine or think about scaling to a reasonable amount. So now here come the hackles. The hackles are a series of, they're horseshoe nails, upside down. Mitch made these. And it's a series of increasingly, they're closer and closer together, so increasingly fine distancing. And it just helps one more physical step to try to get out some of that material and line up the fibers in the same direction, which helps with spinning and the next steps of the process. I usually do end up a little bit bloody after this. Accidentally nab yourself. So already I know that the bundle I grabbed, it was, I grabbed not the best one for demo. It was a bunch that I remember I think it was on the field too long. It was a little bit too old. And I could tell right away when I broke it, the breaking, that it literally broke in half. It's not supposed to do that. But when we do the demo, when you come up, we'll try some of the other fibers too. Because ideally, it's one long fiber that's as long as the plant itself. And that's really the difference between the flax fiber and wool fiber from most sheep. And that it has the potential to have long line, which is the full length of the plant. Yeah. So it isn't bad for like, I've never had so many people watch me do this. But you can start to see there's some fiber here. And there's more. We bring up the example bundles. So this is also some of what we generated or made last weekend with the same tools, just grabbed a different bunch of fiber last weekend. And this is part of what was grown in last summer's community grow project. So most of that is like the length of the plant, which is pretty cool. But it also means things like you can't use the woolen mills that we have in the US because the fiber is so different. You can't clean it and process it the same way, but you also can't spin it on the same equipment. So there are some technical challenges for what to do next and how we might imagine being able to scale up for making our clothes. All right. So the hackling demonstrated with the combs. And Mitch has been demoing spinning from the start. And so this is what we just walked through, the hand processing. That's in contrast with more industrial scale processing that can produce material ready to make into garments. And then, yeah, what do we have for maybe something in between? We have the hand processing, which you can see takes definitely finesse and time. And we have these big processing equipment that we have zero in existence on our continent. In fact, some folks in Oregon that did some work kind of looking at researching the capacity for kind of bringing back flax in a meaningful way in the US, were able to trace back that the last flax processing equipment was sold from the US in the 60s. So it's been many, many decades since this has even been a thought. And so it's interesting because it's not just about bringing back capacity to do things, manufacturing, it's also bringing back the culture and the knowledge and know-how and the appreciation for how to do it. And I find that like other element to be really fascinating as well. So we're not the only ones that are thinking about this challenge of like, do we want to go really small, where everyone's doing this by hand? We want to go really big, where you're, again, having these supply chains that span continents? Or is there something in the middle? And I've been really interested in thinking about what might be in the middle. And some of the things that I've been interested in kind of checking out, there's, for woolen mill production, or wool yarn production, there's this concept from the Hilo Lab, which is based in Germany. They've been developing for many years now an open source, so meaning like their plans for the development of it are all freely available, small scale spinning machines. So these are, so this is Jordan Masters is another researcher that's interested in supporting Fibershed small scale textile production in the US as well. He's based in West Virginia, and he's been kind of doing these proof of concepts builds of these Hilo spinning machines out in West Virginia. And a combination of 3D printing and milling, he's able to put these units together. And his vision is that small sheep wool producers, and maybe even like this is a device that could be built and maintained at an extension office where multiple people in a small bioregion like a fiber shed could come by and use these smaller scale spinning and processing equipment that are relatively inexpensive and open source and can be tailored to specific fiber types. And then there's another kind of Fibershed collaborator, Rosie Bristow in Ireland, who's been working on kind of developing similarly minded open source small scale equipment for flax. And so what I'd be super excited to do in the next like chapter of Michigan Fibershed dreaming and teaming for research is building our own kind of similar proof of concept, medium scale processing equipment. So with that, we've reached the end of this presentation, but we have eager U of MC's master's students downstairs hosting our table. Oh, some of them are here in the room as well. So they've been helping us research that, like, who is here in Michigan? What is the story of Michigan natural fiber through a series of interviews and developing some surveys that we'll send out throughout the state to get a better idea of who's doing what, where, how much, and how can we like use that information to identify barriers and create networks to kind of create the flow of that material moving through our state better. So I was thinking we could do some questions. We still have 10 minutes. And then also come up and try out this equipment. Maybe we can do it simultaneously. Does that make sense, or is that too chaotic?
It sounds like if everybody is aware of the fact that the stage is on a platform. So if you are walking up to watch Mitch, please be careful that you don't trip and fall into one of those pointy things. Yes. But yes, I have a mic that I can pass around for questions. Here's our first one.
Hi, because flax is a natural material, how long after the harvest do you have to process it? Does it go bad?
If you store it in, so water and sun will make it bad. If you can eliminate the exposure to either of those elements, it can last a real long time. Like I've heard even years to decades in a barn. But I have also seen it left with some sunlight exposure, even through a window, and it gets just super brittle and will break, like you just saw. And then if it's exposed to moisture, then it will keep retting unintentionally, and then it will also break, and then it doesn't work as well. But it does store really well.
Okay, I saw this hand first, so I'm gonna find a way over there.
Oh, someone is writing their name. Also, please write. We have brochures up here and like little info cards that you can check out our website. And we're also collecting information for folks that want to be part of the Michigan Fibershed organization, like help us with events and hosting classes and working with kids, working with community, maybe growing. We'll add you to our email list if you add yourself to that paper.
Yeah, I actually had sort of a community-related question. I was curious if your organization is thinking at all with, I come from a New England, like, defunct thread mill town, and there, these types of places and communities and existing infrastructure are kind of throughout the United States. And I was wondering sort of what kinds, what connections, if any, do you see with community revitalization projects?
Yeah, so I hear two things on that. One is connecting to revitalization where there was an industry there before. Like a lot of places in New England that do have a rich fiber history, we don't have that direct connection in Michigan. There were definitely people growing flax and processing it, but I haven't, and please correct me if anyone knows more, I haven't heard of any like flax mills or production facilities, manufacturing facilities, even through the Rust Belt. But to connect, or to answer the other part of your question, so because we're part of this group, international organization of Fibershed affiliates, we are connected and in conversation. In beginning of January, I was out in Philly. The PA Flax Project, I think, is one of the more advanced in developing their plans. And so they were granted a USDA grant maybe 2 years ago to scope out like the feasibility of like what will it look like to build a scutching mill. That's like the very first step. Flax comes off the field, and now we're going to start to get some of the breaking and the scutching done. They still, in that business model, will send the material for the next step in Europe because we have zero spinning capacity. But at least then when they ship it, they don't send like 60 to 70% of the material that is not the fiber. So that was part of their plan. And so I was out there visiting, and they got a donation or loan from one of the community members that was like, what do you need next? And they're like, well, if we're going to grow hundreds of acres of flax, we actually need that specialized equipment. So they were able to purchase a harvester and a turner from a European company, came over on a crate, and now they have their equipment, so they can go down and turn the flax, harvest it and make those really nice rows. And they're teaming up with farmers there that have expressed interest in experimenting with it as another part of their rotation. And this year is the first year they're going to do that large-scale planting and seeing how it goes. So we know people are out there doing these things, and we're in close conversation and connection to see how it could happen in Michigan in some capacity. So PA, definitely one of those revitalizing fiber industry visions. Mm-hmm.
There were some other hands that had gone up.
We'll also be at the table. I'll be back downstairs at the table. But
Let's
please keep.
we
We have 5 more minutes.
we have 5 more minutes. Since I'm close here, and then if you don't mind not using a mic, you can just go after this.
I have a question. Here, we are really used to cheap prices of clothing, so I feel that it's going to be a value change. So people need to be educated what it actually takes to produce the fiber and the garment, and not just from flax, from pretty much any natural fiber. What kind of outreach have you done or are planning to do
Yeah.
to educate the public to actually have a change of values?
Yeah, it's a huge, huge part. Thanks for that point. It does feel sometimes ridiculous to stand up here and like, hey, let's all just wear clothes made in Michigan. Because first of all, we can't find them all. And most of us probably can't afford them all. And so how do you reconcile that challenge? And I don't have the roadmap for how to do it. There are a lot of different parts, and this is part of why I referenced the culture building and culture making. So part of it is definitely shifted values. Some of it is structural challenges, like why are those clothes so cheap? Why is it that we can so cheaply ship these materials with global supply chains, and it causes both environmental crises as well as labor crises? Because essentially for the clothes that we're wearing here in the US, we're outsourcing the environmental damage that is caused by the manufacturing in other countries. So we're not collecting the toxic dyes that are pouring out of the industrial dye processes. That's going to someone else's land, someone else's watershed. We're also outsourcing the labor, the really horrific labor conditions to make those cheap clothes. So imagine a time, also cheap oil. Imagine a time when those 3 things just don't, they're not, the structures that hold them up dissolve, disintegrate. They're no longer able to hold up those false cheap things, labor, environmental destruction, and cheap oil. It may not be in my lifetime, but I think it's an inevitability that at some point those things aren't going to be able to be maintained. And in the meantime, we can be here thinking, sometimes maybe it feels more theoretical than actual, but we're actually putting into place some of those connections between people. We're trying to preserve the skills and the craft, knowledge and know-how by doing things like this. And maybe by seeing this, it sparks some idea in a young person that still has their whole career ahead of them to think about similarly building and contributing to such structures. So it's not straightforward, but I think it's possible, and I think it's going to happen at some point.
I'll try. Seed sourcing. So I grew a few square feet of linen last year and had a heck of a time finding fiber flaxseed. Do you have recommendations? And if you don't have recommendations that are available, would there be something like a bulk buy program that you could coordinate? Because I'm finding flowers and oil flax, but not fiber flaxseed. in the volume that I understand I would need for like what's pictured here.
Yeah, so Mitch and I both have bought 50-pound bags of flax independently. We just realized earlier that we both bought them throughout the years. Like I think I got mine 2 years ago from Fiber Revolution, which is a group in Oregon, kind of similarly minded, trying to revitalize flax industry. And they, a few years before that, grew a massive crop in Montana for seed. I think that they're nearly out of that because I saw they're not selling it this year, unfortunately. Yeah.
Is there a step in that cycle that's seed saving, or is this a crop that you have to be buying?
No, it's definitely, I didn't bring it up here, but the rippling is the seed saving. One challenge is you can't save seeds from the same crop that you're making fiber from, because you want to harvest it before the seeds are ready. Otherwise, the plant's too old. So you just need to set aside some part of your crop for the seed saving. Yep. But it's definitely, let's be in touch about that, because I think it's something that we should be thinking about as a region for independent seed, flax seed production. Also to work towards having a regionally adapted flax. And also in conversation with the PA Flax folks about this, because it's a challenge. Right now, I think they're bringing in most of their seeds from Europe for their big grow. We have a meeting on Tuesday to talk about it.
Okay, any other questions? You're welcome to come up and chat. I also wanted to mention, starting now, there are drop-in crafts in the secret lab in the basement level. And then a little beyond the secret lab in the multi-purpose room are some demos happening. So thank you so much for coming. And again, be mindful of the stage. And it's just here.